Imagine standing at the edge of an endless blue horizon, a place where land meets water, and survival itself hangs in the balance. 5.5 million years ago, our fragile ancestors, small bands of early hominins, took their first steps toward the coast. They were not seafarers, they had no nets, no boats, no maps, and yet, driven by hunger and desperation, they reached the shorelines of Africa. Here, they faced dangers unlike any they had known, towering waves, shifting tides, and predators both in the water and on the beaches. But here too, they discovered something new: abundance. Shellfish, stranded fish, and rich coastal plants offered food in ways the desert could not. Join us as we uncover how the coast became humanity's first new frontier. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss these forgotten stories. 5.5 million years ago, the Earth was a land of transitions. Africa's forests had already begun to shrink, savannas stretched wide, and deserts challenged survival. But beyond these hardships lay another environment, one as dangerous as it was full of opportunity: the coast. The shoreline was a boundary unlike any other. It was both a barrier and a source of life. For small groups of early hominins, reaching the coast was not planned. It was the result of wandering in search of food, water, and new land. Driven by hunger, they pushed farther than before, and one day they found themselves before the sea. The sight must have been overwhelming. A vast expanse of water with no end in sight. The roar of waves, the pull of tides, the smell of salt in the air. It was alien, terrifying, and yet strangely inviting. For the first time, they encountered an environment where food washed ashore, fish stranded in tidal pools, shellfish clinging to rocks, crabs scuttling across the sand. This was a new kind of abundance, different from forests and deserts. But it came with risks. Coastal predators, crocodiles, sharks, and even birds of prey ruled these edges. The sea itself could take life as quickly as it gave. This is the story of those first fragile steps to the coast, of how hunger led to discovery, and how the meeting of land and sea shaped the destiny of humankind. 5.5 million years ago, Africa was in flux. The dense forests that once blanketed the land had thinned, savannas spread wide, and deserts pressed ever harder on the horizon. For our early ancestors, small-bodied hominins standing barely over a meter tall, this transformation meant one thing: survival had grown uncertain. The savanna offered food, but not enough. Roots had to be dug, insects scavenged, and carcasses stolen from predators. Competition was fierce, not only with lions, hyenas, and leopards, but also with other hominin bands. Resources dwindled, and hunger pressed more heavily on every decision. The world was not waiting for them to adapt. It demanded change. So they wandered, slowly at first, edging away from familiar paths, testing new ground. They moved in groups, carrying infants clutched to their chests, relying on sticks and stones as their only tools. They followed animal herds, hoping to scavenge scraps. They tracked the smell of rain, searching for rivers that had not yet dried. Each step carried them farther than the generation before. The journeys were not heroic, they were desperate. Each band knew hunger intimately. Mothers worried over children with weak cries, elders staggered behind, young males took risks at the edges. Yet together they pressed onward, driven by instinct. Somewhere food must exist. It was this wandering that little by little pushed them toward the coast. At first, they did not know what they sought. They only knew what lay behind them: parched savannas, dying rivers, predators that struck with merciless speed. Ahead was uncertainty, but uncertainty carried the faint promise of survival. And so, without maps, without plan, they set in motion a journey that would lead them to the very edge of their world, the sea. Imagine their first glimpse of the ocean. After weeks of trudging across dry plains, following rivers that thinned to streams, they crested a rocky rise and the land fell away into a horizon of endless blue. The sea. Vast. Unknowable. Alive with movement and sound unlike anything they had ever known. Waves rolled against the shore, thundering and retreating, their rhythm both frightening and mesmerizing. The wind carried salt on its breath, stinging cracked lips. Birds wheeled above, their cries sharp and alien. The shoreline glittered under the sun, shifting between wet sand and jagged rock. For small, fragile creatures who had only known rivers and streams, the sea must have seemed like a living giant. It could not be crossed, could not be contained. It roared louder than any predator, reached farther than any forest. AY must have mixed with terror as they stood staring at a world that stretched beyond sight. Some hesitated, clinging to higher ground. Others ventured closer, testing the water with cautious hands. The waves surged forward, splashing their legs, sending them stumbling back with shrieks of alarm. To them, the ocean was alive, something to be respected, feared, perhaps even worshipped. But hunger drove courage. Along the tide pools and wet sands, life revealed itself. Fish stranded by retreating waves, shellfish clinging stubbornly to rocks, crabs scuttling sideways across the beach. Here was food, different and strange, but food all the same. The band, curious and desperate, crept forward. They sniffed, prodded, tasted. Some gagged on the salty tang. Others chewed cautiously, then swallowed and discovered that survival could be found where the land kissed the sea. The first encounter with the coast was not just discovery, it was transformation. In that moment, humanity's world expanded beyond rivers and forests, deserts and plains. The sea, once a terrifying barrier, had begun to reveal itself as a provider. The shoreline was strange, but hunger has always been a teacher. As the band explored the wet sands, their eyes fell on strange shapes glistening in the tide pools. Fish trapped by the retreating waves flopped helplessly in shallow pools. Small crabs scuttled beneath stones. Shells, some closed tightly, others cracked open, lay scattered across the rocks. At first, curiosity mingled with caution. These were not the roots, fruits, or insects they knew. The smell was sharp, salty, unlike anything from the forests or savannas. A child poked at a crab only to yelp when its claw pinched a finger. Laughter rare in the desert rose from the group, and in that small moment of fear and amusement, learning began. Trial and error guided them. A fish wriggling in a shallow pool was caught by fumbling hands, its scales slick and shining. One of the adults bit into it raw. The taste was strange, briny, and the flesh tough. Yet after swallowing, strength flickered back into tired limbs. Another learned to smash fish against rocks, softening it before eating. Soon, even the children began scooping at the pools, chasing darting silver bodies with eager shrieks. Shellfish offered new lessons. Stones cracked them open, revealing soft meat inside. At first, some spat it out, grimacing. Others chewed carefully, finding it filling. Hunger dulled hesitation, and within days, the band learned which shells were safe and which to avoid. They began gathering them in small piles, carrying them back to where the group huddled together. Seaweed, too, was sampled. Some varieties were spat out, too tough or bitter. But others provided nutrients they did not know they craved. Slowly, the coast revealed itself not as an enemy, but as a table spread with food if only they dared to taste. Every new discovery expanded their world. Each bite of fish, each cracked shell, each edible plant reshaped what survival could mean. For the first time in their existence, food was not just hunted, scavenged inland, it was gathered from the rhythm of the tides. The shoreline was a risk, but it was also abundance, and abundance meant hope. Hunger had always forced creativity, but the coast demanded something more: adaptation. Here, survival was not about chasing animals or digging roots, it was about unlocking the ocean's hidden bounty. And tools became the key. Stones were the first allies. Sharp rocks, carried from inland, became shell crackers. A single strike split open oysters or mussels clinging to the rocks. Soon, the band began to search specifically for flat, heavy stones that fit into their hands, perfect for smashing and prying. What had once been weapons against predators were now instruments of nourishment. Sticks, too, found new purpose. Sharpened on rough stone, they became spears to prod at tide pools, dislodge crabs from their hiding places, or spear fish trapped in shallow water. Children, eager to imitate adults, wielded their own smaller sticks, turning survival into a kind of learning game. Even hands adapted. Fingers pried seaweed loose from rocks, dug beneath sand for burrowing clams, or cupped water to scoop stunned fish into baskets of woven reeds. Cooperation made the task easier. One distracted a crab with a stick while another grabbed it from behind. One cracked shells while others collected. With time, the band began to recognize the best places for gathering. Jagged rocks at low tide revealed oysters and barnacles. Pools warmed by the sun trapped fish and shrimp. Sandy stretches yielded clams if you dug with enough patience. The coastline itself became a map of resources, teaching them through trial and error. The tools of the tide were simple, but they were revolutionary. Never before had food been unlocked in such ways. The desert had starved them, the savannah had tested them, but here, at the shore, tools transformed their relationship with the land. For the first time, they were not just scavengers of scraps left by stronger predators. They were gatherers, innovators, and creators of opportunity. The tide had taught them a lesson. With imagination, the sea could provide, and that lesson would echo across the millennia, shaping the future of humankind. The coast offered abundance, but abundance always attracted competition. For our ancestors, the shoreline was no gentle paradise, it was another battlefield, one with new predators and unfamiliar threats. The first dangers came from the water itself. Estuaries, where rivers met the sea, teemed with crocodiles. These ancient reptiles had ruled waterways for millions of years, and they were perfectly adapted to ambush. To a thirsty hominin crouching at the water's edge, the surface seemed calm. Then, in an instant, jaws burst upward, teeth like daggers snapping shut. More than once, the ocean claimed a life in this way not from hunger, but from a predator's sudden strike. Further out, the sea hid its own terrors. Sharks patrolled the shallows. Early humans, wading after stranded fish, sometimes saw dark shapes circling just beyond reach. When one ventured too far, there was no escape. The ocean gave food, but it demanded caution. Even the sky was dangerous. Seabirds, massive and aggressive, ruled the beaches. They swooped at the band when they approached nests, their beaks sharp and wings powerful. Eggs, though tempting, often became battles. A child's cry as a bird struck its head would send adults rushing, waving sticks to drive the creatures away. The coast was alive with constant risk. Nor were humans the only foragers. Hyenas prowled even here, drawn to carcasses washed ashore. Jackals scuttled along the edges, ready to steal scraps. The band had to defend what they gathered, shouting, throwing stones, standing together against rivals that were faster and stronger. But perhaps the greatest danger was the sea itself. Waves surged unpredictably, knocking the fragile hominins from their feet. Tides rose swiftly, cutting off escape from rocky pools. A misstep meant being dragged into the churning surf, lungs filling with salt water, cries lost beneath the roar. For our ancestors, the coast was no sanctuary. It was a test where every gift of food came wrapped in danger. To survive here required not just hunger, but vigilance. And those who learned to balance risk with reward carved a new path for humanity along the shores of time. The sea was alive, but unlike the savannah or the desert, it moved with patterns. Waves crashed and receded, tides rose and fell. At first, the band experienced this as confusion. One day the pools brimmed with fish and shellfish. The next, they were empty. The waterline shifted, reshaping the coast each time. It seemed unpredictable, even magical. But slowly, patterns emerged. Elders began to notice the cycle. When the moon swelled, tides rose higher, covering rocks and hiding food. When the moon waned, the sea retreated, exposing the bounty of tide pools. The band learned to time their foraging, arriving when the water drew back and revealed its treasures. This recognition was extraordinary. It meant that survival was no longer random. It meant prediction, foresight, primitive science in its earliest form. They could now plan, choosing when to search and when to wait, conserving energy for the right moment. The rhythm of the tides became a teacher. Children were shown how the waves advanced and retreated, how to wait until crabs scuttled into shallow pools, how to dash in and grab fish left behind. Their laughter echoed as they learned, turning necessity into instinct. Even the stars and moon above became guides. Their reflection on the waves tied the sky to the sea, teaching the band to connect patterns between earth and heavens. Perhaps, unknowingly, This was the beginning of navigation, not yet across oceans, but within their own fragile world. Of course, mistakes were costly. A few who misjudged the tide found themselves stranded on rocks as water surged back in, forced to cling desperately until retreat was possible. Others, distracted in pools, were caught by waves that dragged them into deeper water. Each mistake was carved into memory, a warning for the next generation. But with each passing cycle, they grew wiser. The ocean's rhythm became a part of them. The tides, once terrifying, became predictable. The band began to move with the sea, adapting their lives to its pulse. Here, on the edge of land and water, humanity learned its first lessons in timing, patience, and foresight. The ocean was no longer only a threat, it was a partner, one that offered life to those who listened. When the sun sank behind the horizon, the ocean transformed. By day it had been shimmering and loud, but by night it became something else mysterious, vast, and unsettling. Waves gleamed silver under the moonlight, their constant rhythm filling the darkness with a low, endless roar. For our ancestors, the night was always dangerous, but near the coast it carried new fears. Inland, they had learned to huddle in trees or on rocky ground, but here the ocean never rested. The tide crept closer as they slept, forcing the band to choose carefully where to settle. Too near the water, and they risked being swept away. Too far inland, and they entered the domain of prowling predators, hyenas, jackals, even lions that sometimes stalked the shore in search of stranded prey. The group pressed tightly together for warmth. Salt wind chilled their damp skin, making the night air feel sharper than the heat of the day. Infants were tucked into the center, shielded by mothers and older siblings, while adults took turns watching the waves and scanning the dunes. The moon's reflection on the ocean was both beautiful and frightening. To their eyes, it must have looked like a glowing path stretching across the water, disappearing into darkness. Did they wonder what lay beyond? Did they fear that the ocean itself was alive, watching them as they slept? The sounds of the coast made rest uneasy. The crash of waves masked the footsteps of predators. The cries of seabirds pierced the night. The sudden splash of a fish leaping from the water could send hearts racing, mistaken for a lurking danger. Fear became their constant companion, but fear also kept them alive. Yet even in this fear, the coast offered something new, a rhythm of safety. The tides were predictable, the stars bright enough to guide. Over time, they learned where to sleep on higher dunes, on rocky shelves, or beneath overhangs where waves could not reach. Slowly, the terrifying nights became lessons. The sea, as strange as it was, had a pattern, and pattern meant survival. The inland deserts and savannas had taught our ancestors harsh lessons about scarcity. There, food was fought over, guarded, and rationed with tension. But the coast was different. The shoreline offered abundance, and with abundance came something unexpected: sharing. When tide pools brimmed with fish and shellfish, there was enough for all. Adults cracked open shells and passed pieces to children. Mothers taught little hands to scoop crabs from the sand. Even elders, too weak to chase prey inland, found nourishment in the easier harvests of the shore. Hunger no longer divided it, united. This abundance reshaped their behavior. Without the constant edge of desperation, conflict within the group lessened. Cooperation, already essential, grew deeper. They worked together to gather food, to carry piles of shellfish back to safer ground, to watch the tide and time their harvests. The act of sharing did more than feed bellies, it fed bonds. Around their resting places, the band began to gather not just for warmth, but for food. They ate together, chewing slowly, grunting and gesturing as they exchanged scraps. In these small moments, the seeds of culture were sown. The shoreline, with its bounty, encouraged trust and interdependence. Even play began to emerge. Children splashed in shallow water, chasing fish, their laughter carrying across the sand. Such joy was rare inland, where survival demanded constant vigilance. Here, for the first time, there was space for something more than survival, for connection, for learning, for memory. The shoreline transformed not only their diet, but their spirit. The desert had carved resilience, the savanna had sharpened awareness, but the coast introduced something new: abundance that could be shared. And with that abundance, humanity's earliest sparks of cooperation and community began to burn brighter. Not every band of early humans reached the coast. Many remained inland, clinging to the savannas and shrinking forests. For them, life was familiar, though no less brutal, hunting for roots, chasing insects, scavenging from predators. The coast, with its strange abundance and terrifying waters, became a dividing line in survival strategies. Inland, survival meant constant movement across dangerous plains, always aware of lions, leopards, and hyenas. The land offered food only in cycles, feast when fruit ripened or herds passed, famine when the rains failed. Every step inland demanded caution and strength. By contrast, the coast provided consistency. The sea's tides were predictable, its offerings reliable. Shellfish clung to rocks every day, fish washed into tide pools with each retreating wave, crabs and seaweed could be harvested year-round. To those who dared to approach, the coast promised fewer starving nights. Yet the coast was not for everyone. Its dangers were unfamiliar, and its alien environment demanded new skills. Some bands feared the roar of waves, the pull of tides, and the creatures lurking in the water. Others tried and failed, losing members to crocodiles, drowning, or simple inexperience. The ocean rewarded patience and innovation but punished recklessness. The split between inland and coastal life marked the beginning of diversity in human survival strategies. Some groups became masters of the savanna, their instincts honed by open plains and predator-filled nights. Others became foragers of the shore, their diets enriched by fish, shellfish, and marine plants. Each path carried risks, but both contributed to the tapestry of evolution, and so humanity grew not as one people, but as many, shaped by deserts, savannas, forests, and now, the coast. Each environment etched new lessons into their instincts. The story of survival was no longer singular, it was many stories, woven together, stretching across landscapes as vast as Africa itself. The coast was more than a new source of food, it was a turning point in human history. For the first time, our ancestors expanded their diet beyond land, adding the richness of the sea. Shellfish, fish, seaweed, and crabs brought new nutrients, especially the fats and proteins that fueled brain growth. Though they could not know it, the coast was feeding not only their bodies, but their future. The shoreline also gave them new ways of thinking. To survive here, they had to recognize patterns in the tides, to anticipate the sea's rhythm. This was more than instinct, it was foresight. They were beginning to look ahead, to plan, to imagine what might come. Tools, too, evolved at the coast. Stones became shell crackers, sticks became spears for prodding tide pools. These adaptations were small, but they set a precedent. The environment could be shaped by creativity and survival improved by innovation. Perhaps most importantly, the coast taught community. With abundance to share, cooperation deepened. Families grew closer, bonds strengthened, and the first sparks of culture glimmered in shared meals and laughter by the tide pools. The sea had not only given them food, it had given them one another. This legacy echoes even now. Humanity's fascination with the sea, its mysteries, its horizons, its promises may trace back to those first fragile encounters. The instinct to explore, to wonder what lies beyond the waves, was born here. The coast was our first frontier, and it planted the seed of exploration that would one day carry us across oceans, and eventually into the stars. The legacy of the coast is survival, yes, but it is also curiosity, cooperation, and imagination. It was here, 5.5 million years ago, that humanity first stood at the edge of the unknown and chose to step closer. The story of the first humans who reached the coast is one of courage, curiosity, and transformation. They were not explorers in the way we imagine today, they were desperate, fragile, and hungry. Yet in their desperation, they found something extraordinary. The sea terrified them, its waves roared, its predators lurked unseen, its tides threatened to sweep them away. And yet, they stayed. They cracked open shells, chased fish in tide pools, learned the rhythm of the moon and the water. They adapted. For the first time, survival meant more than reacting to danger. It meant anticipating, planning, and sharing. The ocean had forced them to think differently, to see the world in cycles, to imagine tomorrow. And in doing so, it lit a spark that would carry forward through countless generations. The coast was not the end of their journey. It was the beginning of a new way of being human. It taught resilience, cooperation, and the courage to face the unknown. And those lessons, carved into the tides, remain with us still. If this journey inspired you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it, so together we can keep uncovering the epic struggles that shaped humanity's earliest story.